If you knew that the stranger borrowing your phone tonight was one of the richest men in the entire city, would you still trust him? The wind moved sharply through the Chicago bus terminal, carrying the smell of rain and gasoline across the nearly empty street. Olivia Carter pulled her thin jacket closer around her shoulders as the last evening buses came and went under the pale glow of the streetlights. It had been a long shift at the diner across the road, and her feet ached after standing behind the counter for more than 10 hours. She checked the time on her phone again, hoping the next bus would arrive soon, when hurried footsteps echoed across the pavement. A tall man approached from the darkness, his expression tense, his breath uneven as though he had been running. His suit was expensive but wrinkled, his hair damp from the rain, and his eyes scanned the street like someone searching for danger. Then he stopped in front of her. His voice was low but urgent. "Excuse me, I know this sounds strange, but could I please use your phone for a moment? Mine stopped working, and I need to make one call right now." Olivia hesitated. In a city like Chicago, lending your phone to a stranger late at night was not the smartest decision. Yet something about the exhaustion in his eyes felt real. He did not look dangerous. He looked desperate. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Olivia studied the man for another second while the wind rustled the paper advertisements on the bus shelter wall. Her phone was old and the screen was cracked across the corner, but it was the most important thing she owned. Without it, she could not pick up extra shifts, call her landlord, or check messages from the hospital where her mother was receiving treatment. Still, the stranger stood there quietly, not reaching for the phone, not pressuring her, simply waiting with the patience of someone who understood that trust could not be demanded. Finally, Olivia sighed softly and unlocked the phone. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "Just make it quick." The man accepted it with careful hands, almost as if the small device were something fragile. He stepped a few feet away and dialed a number from memory. When the call connected, he spoke only one sentence. "It is me. I am safe. Send the car." Then he ended the call and returned the phone to her with a look of genuine relief. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have no idea how much that helped." Olivia gave a small shrug, slipping the phone back into her pocket. "It was nothing," she replied. But as the stranger walked toward the edge of the street where a black vehicle slowly appeared from the darkness, Olivia had the strange feeling that the simple decision she had made in that cold Chicago night was about to change her life in ways she could not possibly imagine. The black vehicle rolled slowly toward the curb beneath the pale streetlight, its headlights cutting through the mist that hung over the quiet Chicago street. Olivia Carter watched with quiet curiosity as the stranger who had borrowed her phone walked toward the car without hesitation, as though this was exactly what he had been expecting. The vehicle stopped beside him, and the rear door opened almost immediately. Olivia could not see the driver clearly, only the silhouette of a man in a dark suit sitting behind the wheel. The stranger paused for just a moment before stepping inside. Before the door closed, he glanced back toward the bus shelter where Olivia stood. For a second, their eyes met again across the distance. Then the door shut, and the car pulled away smoothly into the night traffic, disappearing beyond the next intersection. Olivia remained standing there for a moment longer, unsure why the strange encounter lingered in her mind. The wind pushed a loose newspaper page across the sidewalk, and she wrapped her jacket tighter around herself. Just another strange moment in a city full of strangers, she told herself quietly. A few minutes later, the bus finally arrived with a heavy hiss of air brakes. Olivia climbed aboard, tapping her worn transit card against the reader before finding a seat near the middle of the bus. The interior lights flickered softly as the bus pulled back into the street and began the slow ride across the west side of Chicago. She rested her head lightly against the window, watching rows of brick apartment buildings pass by beneath the dim orange streetlights. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket, and she checked it quickly, hoping it might be a message offering an extra shift at the diner. Instead, it was only a reminder notification about the rent that was now 3 days late. Olivia sighed quietly and locked the screen again. Money had been tight for months now. Ever since her mother had been diagnosed with a heart condition, the medical bills had begun piling up faster than Olivia could handle. She worked every shift the diner manager would give her, sometimes arriving before sunrise and leaving long after the dinner crowd had gone home. Even then, it never seemed to be enough. The bus continued its slow route through the quiet neighborhoods, while Olivia replayed the strange moment from the bus shelter in her mind. The man had looked exhausted, but not ordinary. There had been something about the way he spoke on the phone. Calm, direct, like someone used to being obeyed. And that black car had arrived almost instantly after the call. Olivia shook her head slightly, dismissing the thought. Chicago was full of wealthy people and powerful businesses. Maybe he was just another executive leaving a late meeting downtown. The bus finally reached her stop near a row of aging apartment buildings on a narrow street lined with bare winter trees. Olivia stepped off and began the short walk toward her building, her shoes crunching lightly on the scattered gravel along the sidewalk. Her apartment was on the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. The hallway lights buzzed softly as she climbed the stairs and unlocked the door to her small studio apartment. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a small kitchen counter, and a second-hand table that doubled as both a dining area and a desk. Olivia placed her phone on the table and slipped off her jacket before heating a small can of soup on the stove. As she waited for it to warm, she glanced at the phone again, remembering the stranger holding it only minutes earlier. It was such a simple moment. A stranger asking for help. A quick phone call. A black car appearing out of nowhere. Yet something about it felt unfinished, like the first page of a story she did not yet understand. Across the city, far beyond the quiet apartment where Olivia Carter sat alone with her late-night dinner. The same black vehicle that had collected the stranger from the bus shelter moved swiftly through the wide streets of downtown Chicago. Inside the car, the man leaned back against the seat, finally allowing the tension in his shoulders to relax. One of the richest men in the entire city had just borrowed a phone from a waitress who had no idea who he was. And for reasons he could not quite explain, he could not stop thinking about her. Morning arrived quietly over the west side of Chicago as pale sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Olivia Carter's small apartment. The faint rumble of traffic from the street below slowly replaced the silence of the night. Olivia opened her eyes before her alarm even had the chance to ring. She had learned long ago that worrying about bills was a very effective alarm clock. For a moment she remained still, staring at the cracked paint on the ceiling while her mind ran through the same list of problems that greeted her every morning. Rent that was already 3 days late. A stack of medical bills for her mother that seemed to grow larger every week. And another long shift waiting for her at the diner across town. Olivia pushed the blanket aside and sat up slowly. The apartment was cold, and she wrapped her sweater tightly around herself before walking into the tiny kitchen space. The small clock above the sink showed that it was a little past 6 in the morning. She poured a cup of coffee from the cheap machine on the counter and stood quietly by the window while the city began to wake outside. A delivery truck rumbled past the building, and somewhere down the street a dog barked at nothing in particular. Olivia took a slow sip of the bitter coffee and glanced toward the table where her phone rested beside a stack of unopened envelopes. For a brief moment her thoughts returned to the stranger from the night before. The memory of his serious voice and the mysterious black vehicle lingered like the echo of a dream that fades after waking. She wondered who he really was. Maybe a lawyer. Maybe a business executive. Chicago had thousands of them rushing through downtown offices every day. Still, there had been something unusual about the calm authority in his voice when he made that call. Olivia shook the thought away and forced herself back into reality. Wondering about strangers was not going to pay the rent. After a quick shower, she dressed in her diner uniform and stepped out into the chilly morning air. The bus ride downtown took nearly 40 minutes, weaving through busy intersections as commuters filled the sidewalks with the familiar rhythm of city life. When Olivia arrived at the diner, the smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon already filled the air. The diner was not fancy. It was a narrow corner restaurant with faded red booths and a counter that had been polished by decades of customers. But it was honest work, and it kept the lights on in her apartment most months. Olivia tied her apron around her waist and began preparing the tables for the breakfast rush. Within minutes, the diner filled with construction workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, office employees checking their phones while eating pancakes, and delivery drivers stopping in for quick meals. The pace was relentless but familiar. Carry plates. Refill coffee. Smile even when customers did not bother to look up from their phones. As the morning crowd continued, Olivia heard the small television mounted above the counter switch from a weather report to a business news segment. Normally, she ignored it, but a name spoken by the news anchor caught her attention. The screen showed the image of a tall man in a dark suit standing outside a gleaming office building downtown. The caption below, the picture read Daniel Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Technologies. Olivia glanced up only briefly before returning to her work. She did not recognize the face. To her, he was simply another wealthy executive whose companies shaped the skyline of the city from a distance she would probably never reach. But miles away in the upper floors of a glass tower that overlooked the Chicago River, the same man sat in a quiet conference room surrounded by advisors and legal documents. Daniel Whitmore listened as his assistant summarized the schedule for the day, but his attention drifted somewhere else entirely. His thoughts kept returning to a bus shelter, a cracked phone screen, and the quiet kindness of a waitress who had trusted a stranger in the cold Chicago night. High above the busy streets of downtown Chicago, the morning sun reflected brightly across the glass. Walls of Whitmore Technologies headquarters, from the outside the tower, looked like a monument to power and success. Inside the top-floor conference room, Daniel Whitmore sat at the long polished table surrounded by executives, financial advisors, and attorneys who waited for his next decision. The meeting had already lasted more than 2 hours. Charts covered the large screen at the front of the room, while voices discussed mergers, market predictions, and expansion strategies that could shift billions of dollars in value across the technology industry. Daniel listened without speaking for several moments. Normally, he was known for his sharp focus and decisive leadership. Investors trusted him because he rarely hesitated. Yet today something was different. His assistant Claire noticed it immediately. Daniel Whitmore was not a man who lost his concentration easily, but his eyes drifted toward the window where the Chicago River curved between the tall buildings below. The memory returned again with surprising clarity. A quiet bus shelter, a cracked phone screen, a waitress who had trusted him without asking a single question. Claire finally paused the presentation and looked toward him carefully. "Mr. Whitmore, are you comfortable with the acquisition timeline?" she asked. Daniel blinked once, as if returning from somewhere far away. "Yes, continue," he replied calmly. The meeting resumed, but the image of Olivia Carter standing beneath that streetlight refused to leave his mind. It was strange. Daniel Whitmore had met thousands of people during his career. Politicians, investors, celebrities, business leaders from every major city in the country. Yet none of them stayed in his thoughts the way that unknown waitress had after only a few seconds of conversation. When the meeting finally ended, the executives slowly gathered their documents and left the conference room. Claire remained behind with her tablet, reviewing the rest of the day's schedule. "You have a press interview at noon and a board review this afternoon," she explained. Daniel nodded while walking toward the large window that overlooked the city skyline. Claire paused before continuing. "There is something else," she said carefully. "Security mentioned the situation last night near the transit station. Your driver explained that your phone battery died, and you used a bystander phone to contact the car." Daniel turned slightly toward her. "That is correct," he said. Claire studied him for a moment. "Would you like us to send a thank you gift to the woman who helped you?" she asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the crowded streets far below, where thousands of people were moving through their ordinary lives. The thought of sending flowers or a gift card felt strangely inadequate. Olivia Carter had not helped him because she expected a reward. She had simply trusted a stranger on a cold night. "Find her," he said quietly. Claire blinked with mild surprise. "Sir," she asked. "Find her," Daniel repeated. "The woman from the bus shelter." I would like to thank her personally. Claire nodded slowly. It will take some time, but we can check the transit cameras and identify the diner employees working in that area, she said. Daniel gave a brief nod and turned back toward the window. Across the city, Olivia Carter was carrying another tray of coffee cups between crowded tables while the morning rush continued inside the diner. She had no idea that one of the most powerful men in Chicago had just ordered an entire security team to locate a waitress who had simply lent him her phone for a single minute. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of clinking plates, refilled coffee cups, and the constant murmur of conversation inside the crowded diner. Olivia Carter moved quickly between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease while the steady rhythm of work kept her thoughts busy. By the time the breakfast rush finally slowed, the clock above the kitchen door showed nearly 11 in the morning. Olivia wiped down the counter and poured herself a fresh cup of coffee before leaning against the edge of the service station for a moment of rest. Her manager, Frank, stood behind the register counting receipts from the morning shift while the small television above the counter continued playing quiet background news. Olivia barely paid attention. She was calculating the same numbers she had been thinking about all week. Rent that was overdue, another hospital bill that had arrived the day before, and the uncomfortable possibility that she might soon need to ask for more overtime shifts again. Frank looked up from the register and noticed the tired expression on her face. "Long morning," he said. Olivia gave a small smile. "Just the usual," she replied. Frank nodded slowly. "You're doing good work here, Olivia. I know things have been rough lately, but you keep showing up, and that matters." Olivia thanked him quietly before returning to clear another table. Outside the diner, the late morning traffic filled the street, while office workers hurried along the sidewalks, carrying briefcases and paper coffee cups. Several blocks away, inside the headquarters of Whitmore Technologies, Claire sat in a quiet security office reviewing video footage from the transit station cameras. The process had taken several hours, but eventually the moment appeared on the screen. A bus shelter, a tall man approaching quickly, a young waitress standing beneath the light while holding a phone in her hand. Claire paused the video and leaned closer to the screen. The image was not perfectly clear, but it showed enough detail to identify the diner uniform Olivia had been wearing. Claire quickly checked nearby camera angles until another video revealed the name of the restaurant printed on the side of a delivery truck parked across the street. Within minutes, she had a location. Later that afternoon, Daniel Whitmore stood in his private office overlooking the Chicago skyline, while Claire entered carrying a tablet. "I believe we found her," she said calmly. Daniel turned from the window. "The waitress from the transit station," she continued. "Her name appears to be Olivia Carter. She works at a diner about 4 blocks from the station where you made the call last night." Claire handed him the tablet, displaying a still image from the security footage. Daniel studied the image for a moment. Even through the grainy camera frame, he recognized her immediately. The same calm expression, the same quiet trust in her eyes when she had handed him the phone. Daniel placed the tablet on his desk and thought quietly for a moment. Claire waited for instructions. "Should we arrange for a formal thank you package?" she asked. "Flowers perhaps, or a financial gift?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "She did not help me for money." Claire nodded slightly. "Would you like me to schedule a meeting?" then she asked. Daniel walked back toward the window where the afternoon sunlight reflected across the tall buildings of downtown Chicago. For most people in the city, a meeting with Daniel Whitmore required weeks of planning and several layers of approval. Yet the woman who had helped him the previous night had not even known his name. "No meeting," he said after a moment. "I will go myself." Claire raised her eyebrows slightly, but did not question the decision. She simply nodded and made a note on her tablet. Across the city, Olivia Carter finished wiping down the last table of the morning shift and placed the rag beside the sink in the kitchen. She stretched her tired arms for a moment and glanced toward the door as a soft chime announced another customer entering the diner. Olivia had no way of knowing that within the next few days the stranger she had helped at a quiet bus shelter would walk through that same door again and change the direction of her life forever. 3 days passed after Daniel Whitmore made the quiet decision to find the woman who had helped him at the bus shelter. In that short time, the rhythm of life continued for Olivia Carter exactly as it always had. Every morning, she woke before the sun rose over the west side of Chicago, drank a quick cup of coffee in her small apartment, and rode the city bus across town to begin another long shift at the diner. On the third afternoon, the diner was unusually quiet. The lunch crowd had already passed, and only a few customers remained scattered among the red booths along the windows. Olivia wiped down the counter while soft music played from the small radio behind the kitchen door. Her co-worker Maria stacked clean plates beside the coffee machine and stretched her arms. "Slow day," she said with a tired smile. Olivia nodded. "At least it gives us time to breathe," she replied. Outside the large front windows, the early afternoon sunlight reflected off passing cars, and the sidewalks shimmered with the warmth of a mild Chicago day. A moment later, the small bell above the diner entrance chimed softly as the door opened. Olivia turned automatically, expecting another office worker stopping by for a quick cup of coffee. Instead, she froze for a brief second when she recognized the tall figure walking through the doorway. The stranger from the bus shelter stood just inside the entrance, looking around the diner with quiet curiosity. His clothes were different today. Instead of the rain-soaked suit he wore that night, he now had on a simple dark jacket and a light blue shirt. But his calm expression and steady posture were unmistakable. Olivia blinked once, wondering if she was imagining things. Then the man noticed her standing behind the counter and offered a polite smile. "Hello," he said gently. Olivia stepped forward slowly, still surprised. "You're the man from the bus shelter," she said. "The one who borrowed my phone." The man nodded. "Yes, I am. I hope you do not mind me coming here." Olivia shook her head quickly. "No, it is fine," she said. "I was just surprised to see you again." He walked toward one of the empty booths near the window and gestured toward the seat. "May I sit here for a few minutes?" he asked. Olivia smiled politely and picked up a menu, even though she suspected he already knew what he wanted. "Of course," she replied. "What can I get for you?" The man looked down at the menu briefly before answering. "Coffee would be perfect," he said. Olivia poured a fresh cup from a machine and placed it in front of him before sitting across from the booth for a moment, since the diner was still quiet. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Olivia broke the silence with a curious expression. "I never even asked your name the other night," she said. The man hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then he offered a small, friendly smile. "My name is Daniel," he said. Olivia nodded. "I am Olivia." Daniel looked around the diner again, noticing the worn booths and the simple decorations along the walls. It seemed like a place filled with ordinary stories and hard-working people. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said after a moment. "That night my phone died, and I had no way to reach my driver. If you had not helped me, I might have been stuck there for hours." Olivia laughed softly. "It was just a phone call," she said. "Anyone would have done the same thing." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not everyone would have trusted a stranger in the middle of the night," he replied. Olivia looked at him for a moment, sensing that there was more behind his words than he was saying. But before she could ask anything else, the television above the diner counter suddenly switched to the afternoon business report. The screen showed a familiar face standing in front of a tall glass building downtown. The news anchor spoke clearly. Daniel Whitmore, the chief executive officer of Whitmore Technologies, announced today that the company will begin its largest expansion project in Chicago history. Olivia's eyes slowly moved from the television screen back to the man sitting across from her in the booth. For a long silent moment, she simply stared at him, realizing that the stranger who had borrowed her phone was not just another traveler passing through the city. He was one of the richest and most powerful men in Chicago. For several long seconds, Olivia Carter simply stared at the man sitting across from her in the booth while the television above the diner counter continued broadcasting the business report. The image on the screen showed the same face that now sat quietly in front of her, calm and almost amused by her reaction. Daniel Whitmore, the chief executive officer of Whitmore Technologies, the news anchor repeated as the camera showed clips of a glass tower downtown, and a group of reporters gathered around a press conference podium. Olivia slowly turned her eyes back to the man in the booth. "You are Daniel Whitmore," she said quietly. The man lifted his coffee cup and gave a small nod. "Yes," he replied. Olivia blinked once as the realization settled in. She had seen that name in the news before. Everyone in Chicago had. His company employed thousands of people, and his projects were constantly changing the skyline of the city. Yet 3 nights earlier, he had been standing in the rain, asking to borrow her phone like any ordinary stranger. For a moment, Olivia did not know what to say. Finally, she leaned back slightly in the booth and folded her arms. "You could have mentioned that earlier," she said with a faint smile that mixed surprise with disbelief. Daniel smiled in return. "I thought it might make the conversation more complicated," he answered. Olivia laughed softly. "That is one way to put it," she said. "I almost told you that the phone you borrowed barely works half the time." Daniel set the coffee cup down and looked at her with a calm expression. "That phone worked perfectly when I needed it," he said. "And you trusted me enough to hand it over without even asking my name." Olivia shrugged lightly. "You look like someone who needed help," she said. It did not seem like a big decision at the time. Daniel studied her face for a moment, as if trying to understand the simplicity of that answer. For people in his world, every interaction came with conditions and expectations. Business deals, legal agreements, public relations calculations. Yet Olivia had acted without any of those things. She had simply helped. "I want to thank you properly," he said after a moment. Olivia waved her hand dismissively. "You already thanked me," she replied. "Besides, it was just a phone call." Daniel shook his head slowly. "It was more than that," he said. "That night, I was dealing with a situation that could have become very complicated without that call. Your help mattered more than you realize." Olivia looked down at the table for a moment, then back at him. "So what happens now?" she asked with a curious smile. "Do powerful business executives usually visit diners to thank strangers?" Daniel allowed himself a quiet laugh. "Not usually," he admitted. "But I try not to follow too many usual rules." For a moment the conversation paused as Maria walked past their booth, carrying a tray of dishes toward the kitchen. She glanced curiously at Olivia and the well-dressed man sitting across from her, but continued walking without interrupting. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I would like to do something for you, Olivia," he said. "Not because I feel obligated, but because I appreciate what you did." Olivia's expression grew more cautious. "You do not have to give me anything," she said quickly. "I was not expecting that." Daniel nodded. "I know," he replied. "That is exactly why I want to help." Olivia considered his words carefully. The truth was that help would make a real difference in her life right now. But something in her stubborn pride resisted the idea of accepting money from a stranger, even if he was one of the richest men in the city. Before she could respond, Frank called her name from behind the counter, reminding her that another customer had just walked in. Olivia stood up from the booth. "I should get back to work," she said. Daniel nodded politely. "Of course." Olivia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Maybe we can continue this conversation after my shift," she said. Daniel smiled slightly. "I would like that very much," he replied, while watching the woman who had unknowingly changed his evening walk back behind the diner counter. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly inside the diner, as Olivia Carter moved between tables carrying plates and refilling coffee cups, while trying to ignore the strange feeling that the world around her had quietly shifted. Just one booth away from where she worked sat Daniel Whitmore, one of the richest men in Chicago, drinking coffee from a chipped white mug like any other customer. From time to time, she caught herself glancing toward the booth as she walked past. Daniel remained calm and patient, occasionally looking out the window at the traffic passing along the street or reading a short message on his phone. He did not act like someone in a hurry, and strangely that made Olivia feel even more aware of his presence. Most wealthy executives she had ever seen on television were always rushing somewhere important. Yet Daniel Whitmore seemed perfectly comfortable sitting in a modest diner, waiting for a waitress to finish her shift. After nearly 1 hour, the small lunch crowd faded and the diner grew quiet again. Frank walked past Olivia and nodded toward the booth where Daniel was sitting. "That friend of yours has been waiting a while," he said quietly with a curious smile. Olivia shook her head with a nervous laugh. "He is not exactly a friend," she replied. Frank glanced at the well-dressed man again and shrugged. "Well, he seems patient enough," he said before returning to the kitchen. Finally, Olivia removed her apron and hung it beside the counter. Her shift was over for the day. She washed her hands quickly and walked toward the booth where Daniel sat finishing his coffee. "Thank you for waiting," she said. Daniel stood politely as she approached. "I had nowhere more important to be," he replied with a gentle smile. Olivia slid into the seat across from him and folded her hands on the table. "So you said earlier that you wanted to do something for me," she said. "I hope that does not mean handing me a large check." Daniel smiled slightly at her honesty. "No," he said calmly. "I assumed you might refuse that." Olivia nodded. "You assumed correctly," she replied. Daniel leaned back slightly in the booth and considered his words carefully before continuing. "My company funds several community programs across Chicago," he explained. "Some of them focus on job training and support for people facing difficult financial situations." Olivia listened quietly but remained cautious. Daniel continued speaking in the same calm voice. "One of those programs is expanding next month. We are opening a new community center on the west side of the city. The center will help people find better jobs and provide resources for families dealing with medical bills and housing challenges." Olivia's expression softened slightly when she heard those words. That kind of help could change many lives in her neighborhood. Daniel noticed the change in her reaction. "I believe you'll be very good working there," he said. Olivia looked surprised. "Working there," she repeated. Daniel nodded. "Yes, not as a volunteer, but as a paid coordinator helping people connect with the services they need." Olivia leaned back slightly in the booth, processing the offer. It sounded like a meaningful job, but it also sounded like a very large opportunity offered by someone she had met only days earlier. "Why would you offer something like that to me?" she asked honestly. Daniel answered without hesitation. "Because the way you helped a stranger that night told me everything I needed to know about your character." Olivia was silent for several seconds. Outside the diner window, the late afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the street as people hurried past carrying briefcases and grocery bags. Finally, Olivia looked back at Daniel and spoke quietly. "I need to think about that," she said. Daniel nodded respectfully. "Of course," he replied. "I did not expect an answer today." Olivia studied his expression for a moment and realized something surprising. Daniel Whitmore did not look like a powerful executive trying to impress someone. He looked like a man who genuinely believed in the opportunity he had just offered. And for the first time since that strange night at the bus shelter, Olivia Carter felt that the simple act of lending her phone to a stranger might truly be the beginning of something she had never imagined. That evening, Olivia Carter rode the city bus home with her thoughts tangled in a way they had not been in a long time. The conversation with Daniel Whitmore replayed again and again in her mind as the bus moved through the crowded streets of Chicago. Outside the window, the sunset painted the buildings in shades of orange and gold while traffic lights blinked. Slowly, at every intersection, Olivia sat quietly in her seat holding the metal rail beside her, barely noticing the familiar route that she traveled almost every day. The offer Daniel had made at the diner felt almost unreal. A paid position helping run a new community center. A chance to help people who were struggling with the same kinds of problems she faced every day. It was the kind of opportunity she had never imagined someone would offer her. Yet the voice of caution in her mind kept reminding her that the man who offered it was a billionaire she had met only a few days earlier because of a borrowed phone call. When the bus finally reached her neighborhood, Olivia stepped off and began walking toward her apartment building. The air had grown cooler as the evening settled across the city, and the streetlights flickered on one by one along the quiet block. Inside the building, the narrow hallway smelled faintly of old paint and cooking food from neighboring apartments. Olivia unlocked the door to her small studio and stepped inside. The room felt quiet and familiar after the long day. She placed her bag on the table and sat down beside the stack of unopened envelopes that had been waiting for her that morning. One by one, she opened them while sitting under the soft light of the small lamp beside the bed. Rent reminder, medical bill, electricity notice. Each letter carried the same quiet pressure that had been following her for months. Olivia leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes for a moment. The truth was simple. She needed a change. Working endless shifts at the diner was not going to solve these problems forever. Daniel's offer returned to her thoughts again. A job that could help people in her own neighborhood. A stable salary. a chance to do something meaningful instead of simply carrying trays and refilling coffee cups. But another thought troubled her as well. Why would someone like Daniel Whitmore trust her with such responsibility after only one brief encounter? Olivia stood up and walked to the small window beside the bed. Outside, she could see the glow of downtown Chicago in the distance, rising above the dark streets like another world entirely. In that world, Daniel Whitmore was a powerful figure whose decisions shaped entire neighborhoods. In her world, he was simply the stranger who had politely asked to borrow her phone on a cold night. Across the city, inside a quiet office high above the river, Daniel sat alone, reviewing a report about the new community center project. The building would open in a few weeks, and the organization still needed someone who understood the struggles of the neighborhood to help guide people through the services offered there. Daniel leaned back in his chair and thought again about Olivia Carter. He remembered the calm expression on her face when she had handed him the phone without hesitation. Trust like that was rare in a city filled with caution and suspicion. It was the kind of character he believed could make a real difference in the community center. Back in her apartment, Olivia finally returned to the table and picked up her phone. For several minutes, she simply stared at the screen, thinking about the path her life had followed so far. Then she opened the message Daniel's assistant had sent earlier with contact information about the program. Her finger hovered above the reply button while she considered the choice in front of her. Accepting the offer might change everything about her future. Declining it would mean returning to the same routine that had kept her barely surviving month after month. Olivia took a slow breath and began typing a message. She was not ready to give her final answer yet, but she knew one thing for certain. The night she lent her phone to a stranger had opened a door she could no longer pretend did not exist. The following morning, Olivia Carter woke before sunrise with the same question still circling in her mind. The quiet apartment felt colder than usual as the early light slowly filled the small room. She sat at the edge of her bed, holding her phone in both hands, reading again the message she had written the night before but had not yet sent. The words were simple. She wanted to meet again and learn more about the community center before making a final decision. Felt a strange mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore was already in his office reviewing documents when his phone vibrated quietly on the desk. Claire stood nearby, preparing the schedule for the morning meetings when Daniel picked up the device and read the message. A small smile appeared on his face. Claire noticed immediately. "Good news?" she asked. Daniel looked up from the screen. Olivia Carter would like to visit the community center project before making a decision, he said. Claire nodded approvingly. "That sounds reasonable," she replied. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. "Arrange a tour this afternoon," he said. Claire tapped a few notes into her tablet and left the office to organize the visit. Later that day, Olivia finished her shorter morning shift at the diner and walked several blocks toward the address Claire had sent her in a message earlier. Find stability and opportunity. Finally, Claire guided her into a large open room where sunlight streamed through tall windows. Daniel Whitmore stood near the center of the room, speaking with one of the construction supervisors. When he saw Olivia enter, he thanked the supervisor and walked over with a calm, welcoming smile. "I'm glad you came," he said. Olivia looked around the room again before answering. "This place is incredible," she admitted quietly. Daniel nodded. "It will open very soon," he said, "and it needs someone who understands the people it is meant to serve." Olivia looked at him carefully. "You really believe that someone could be me?" she asked. Daniel answered without hesitation. "Yes, I do. Because the person who helped a stranger in the cold without expecting anything in return is exactly the kind of person this community needs." Olivia Carter stood quietly in the large sunlit room of the community center while Daniel Whitmore's words settled slowly in her mind. Around them, the sound of construction tools echoed faintly through the hallways as workers continued finishing the last details before the building would open. Olivia walked a few steps toward one of the tall windows and looked out at the neighborhood street below. From this height, she could see the same blocks where she had taken the bus every morning and past small stores that struggled to stay open. For years, this part of Chicago had felt forgotten by the rest of the city. Now she was standing inside a place designed to help change that reality. She turned back toward Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "It is a beautiful project," she said quietly, "but I still do not understand why you trust me with something this important." Daniel did not hesitate. "Because you understand what it means to struggle," he replied. "People who walk through these doors will not need someone who only reads reports about hardship. They will need someone who has lived it." Olivia folded her arms gently while thinking about his words. Part of her felt honored by the offer, but another part still worried about stepping into a world that seemed far bigger than the diner where she had spent most of her working life. "What if I fail?" she asked honestly. Daniel walked a few steps closer and leaned lightly against the edge of the table. "Everyone fails sometimes," he said calmly. "The difference is whether they keep helping people even after mistakes happen." Olivia looked down for a moment before letting out a quiet breath. In the distance, a group of workers carried new chairs into one of the training rooms while sunlight reflected across the polished floor. She imagined the building filled with people searching for help and guidance. Mothers worried about rent. Fathers looking for better jobs. Young adults trying to find direction. The idea of being able to assist them stirred something inside her that she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Daniel noticed the change in her expression. "When we open this center, it will serve hundreds of families every month," he explained. "Some will need job training. Others will need help navigating medical bills or housing programs. A coordinator here will guide them through those resources." Olivia turned toward him again. "And you believe I could do that?" she said softly. Daniel nodded once. "I believe the person who trusted a stranger at a bus shelter is capable of much more than she realizes." The words made Olivia smile slightly. "That stranger turned out to be one of the richest men in Chicago," she said. Daniel laughed quietly. "That part was mostly coincidence," he replied. For a moment, the two of them stood in comfortable silence while the afternoon light filled the room. Finally, Olivia walked slowly across the floor and stopped beside the center of the open space. She imagined desks placed along the walls and people waiting for assistance at the front reception desk. She imagined conversations where someone might finally feel heard and supported instead of ignored. Then she turned back toward Daniel Whitmore with a steady expression. "I will do it," she said. Daniel's eyes brightened slightly, though his voice remained calm. "You're certain?" he asked. Olivia nodded. "Yes. I cannot promise I will know everything at the beginning, but I can promise I will care about the people who come here." Daniel extended his hand with a warm smile. "That is exactly what this place needs," he said. Olivia shook his hand, and for the first time since that quiet night at the bus shelter, she felt that the simple act of lending her phone to a stranger had truly changed the direction of her life. The official opening of the West Side Community Opportunity Center arrived 3 weeks later on a bright morning that felt warmer than most early spring days in Chicago. A small crowd gathered outside the freshly renovated building as sunlight reflected off the clean brick walls and large glass windows. Residents from nearby streets stood beside local reporters and city officials who had come to witness the opening of a place that many hoped would bring real change to the neighborhood. Olivia Carter stood near the front entrance wearing a simple blue blazer that Claire had helped her choose for the occasion. Only a few weeks earlier she had been carrying trays of coffee inside a diner. But now she was preparing to welcome the first visitors into a center designed to support hundreds of families every month. The change still felt almost unbelievable. Yet as she looked at the crowd gathering along the sidewalk, she felt a quiet sense of purpose growing inside her. Claire stood beside her holding a clipboard while coordinating the final details of the event. "You look ready," she said with an encouraging smile. Olivia nodded slowly, though a hint of nervous energy remained in her voice. "I just want to make sure we do this right," she replied. "People in this neighborhood have waited a long time for something like this." Claire glanced toward the street, where a familiar black vehicle had just pulled to the curb. "I think the person who made this possible has arrived," she said softly. Daniel Whitmore stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance as several reporters turned their cameras in his direction. Despite the attention, he moved calmly through the crowd and stopped beside Olivia with a warm greeting. "Good morning," he said. Olivia smiled back. "Good morning, Daniel," she replied. "Thank you for trusting me with this responsibility." Daniel shook his head gently. You earned this opportunity the moment you helped a stranger without hesitation, he said. A few minutes later, the small ceremony began. One of the city council members spoke briefly about the importance of investment in local communities. Then Daniel stepped forward to address the crowd. His voice remained calm and steady as he described the purpose of the center. This building is not just another office, he explained. It is a place where people can find real support when life becomes difficult. Job training programs will help residents build new careers. Financial guidance will help families manage debt and protect their homes. Most important of all, this center will be led by someone who understands the challenges faced by the people who walk through these doors. Daniel turned slightly and gestured toward Olivia, standing beside him. Olivia Carter grew up in this neighborhood, he continued. She knows the reality of working hard while facing obstacles that seem impossible to overcome. That is why she is the perfect person to guide this center forward. The crowd responded with warm applause as Olivia stepped forward, feeling both humbled and proud. When the ribbon was finally cut and the doors opened, the first visitors entered slowly. Some came out of curiosity, while others came with quiet hope. A middle-aged man approached the front desk asking about job training classes. A young mother asked about housing assistance programs. Olivia greeted each person with patience and kindness, listening carefully as they explained their situations. Daniel watched from across the room for a moment before stepping outside to allow the center to begin its work. As he stood on the sidewalk, he glanced back through the large windows and saw Olivia speaking with a group of residents who had gathered around the information desk. The sight confirmed something he had believed from the beginning. Sometimes the most important change in a community begins with a single act of kindness between two strangers. Several months passed after the opening of the Westside Community Opportunity Center, and the building that once stood quiet and newly renovated had become one of the busiest places in the neighborhood. Every morning, the front doors opened to a steady stream of people searching for guidance, opportunity, or simply someone willing to listen. Inside the bright reception area, Olivia Carter greeted visitors with the same calm patience she had once shown a stranger at a bus shelter on a cold Chicago night. The center had grown into something more than a program. It had become a lifeline for many families who had felt invisible for years. In one room, job training classes helped residents learn new skills for construction, technology support, and office administration. In another room, financial advisors worked with parents trying to organize their debt and protect their homes. The sound of conversation and quiet determination filled the hallways from morning until evening. Olivia moved between offices and meeting rooms throughout the day, guiding people through applications, encouraging them when the process felt overwhelming, and celebrating when someone found a new job or solved a difficult problem. The work was demanding but deeply meaningful. For the first time in her life, she no longer felt like she was only surviving each month. She was helping change the future of the community she had grown up in. One afternoon, as the sun lowered over the city skyline, Olivia finished a meeting with a local resident who had just secured a stable job after completing the training program. She walked toward the front entrance and paused near the large window overlooking the street. A familiar black vehicle had just pulled to the curb outside the building. Moments later, Daniel Whitmore stepped through the front doors, carrying the same calm presence he always brought into the room. Olivia smiled as he approached. "It is good to see you again," she said warmly. Daniel looked around the busy center where people moved between offices with purpose and quiet hope. "I should be the one thanking you," he replied. "This place is doing exactly what it was meant to do." Olivia leaned lightly against the reception desk. "We are only getting started," she said. "There are still many people who need help." Daniel nodded approvingly. "And you have given them a place where they can find it." For a moment, they both stood, watching the activity around them. A young couple walked past carrying folders from the housing assistance office, while another resident spoke with a counselor about job opportunities. The center was alive with progress. Daniel turned back toward Olivia with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about that night at the bus shelter?" he asked quietly. Olivia laughed softly. Sometimes, she admitted, it still feels strange that everything started with a borrowed phone call. Daniel smiled. "A simple moment can change more than we expect," he said. Olivia nodded in agreement. If I had walked away that night, none of this would exist right now. Daniel looked around the building once more before speaking. The truth is that your kindness did more than help me make a phone call. It reminded me that real leadership means investing in people who care about others. Olivia felt a quiet warmth in his words. And you gave me the chance to turn that kindness into something bigger, she replied. Outside, the evening light reflected across the streets of Chicago as people continued their daily routines, unaware of the small decision that had created such meaningful change. What began as a simple act of trust between two strangers had grown into an opportunity that lifted an entire neighborhood. And for Olivia Carter, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the smallest moment of kindness can open a door that leads to a completely different life.